Before we begin, a quick and important reminder. The information in this video is for educational and informational purposes only and is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. If you are struggling, please reach out to a qualified mental health professional or a crisis hotline. Your well-being is the top priority. It's 3 in the morning. The world outside is dark and silent, but inside your head, it's rush hour on a 6-lane highway with no exit ramps. Your heart is pounding a frantic rhythm against your ribs, a drum solo for an audience of one. There's a weight on your chest so heavy you'd swear someone was standing on you. But you're completely alone. You're staring at the ceiling, thinking about a stupid thing you said in a meeting 3 years ago, or worrying about a deadline that's a month away, or maybe you're not even thinking about anything specific at all. It's just a feeling, a hum of dread, a static of anxiety that drowns out everything else. If any part of that sounds familiar, I want you to know 2 things. First, you are not broken. And second, you are so far from being alone it's not even funny. What if I told you that 3 a.m. feeling in all its different shapes and forms is experienced by 1 in 5 American adults every single year? That's not a rounding error. That's 53 million people. That's more than the entire populations of Texas and Florida combined. 53 million people fighting a battle that most of them feel they have to fight in complete silence. And here's the most important part. The real enemy isn't the anxiety, the depression, or the trauma. The real enemy is the silence. It's the stigma. It's the crippling fear that if we admit we're struggling, we'll be seen as weak or damaged or unprofessional. That silence is a poison. It isolates us, it convinces us we're the only one, and it stops us from getting the help that we not only deserve, but that can genuinely save our lives. So how do we fight an enemy that thrives in darkness and silence? We turn on the damn lights. We get loud. And for 1 month every year, the entire country is given a megaphone to do just that. That megaphone is Mental Health Awareness Month. And I know what you might be thinking. Oh great, another awareness month. Pink ribbons, green ribbons, a different color for every cause. It's easy to be cynical. It's easy to see it as just a corporate hashtag or a performative social media post. But by the end of this video, you will see it for what it truly is. A powerful, life-saving, revolutionary movement that was born from unimaginable suffering and has become one of our most important weapons in the fight for our collective well-being. We're not just going to talk about what it is, we're going to uncover why it matters more right now in the United States than ever before. We're going to give you a roadmap, a practical guide to understanding your own mind, supporting the people you care about, and becoming part of the solution that finally shatters the silence for good. This isn't just an issue for other people. This is an American issue. It's an economic issue. Mental health conditions are the single most expensive category of health expenditure in the United States, costing us over $200 billion a year in lost earnings and productivity alone. Think about that. We're not just losing our peace of mind, we're losing our national potential. It's a youth issue. Suicide is the second leading cause of death for Americans aged 10 to 34. Our kids are growing up in a pressure cooker of social media comparison and academic stress, and they are screaming for help. It's a veterans issue. An estimated 17 veterans die by suicide every single day. Men and women who fought for our country abroad are coming home to a battle within themselves they were never trained for. This touches every single corner of our society. And for decades, the default response was to just look away, to sweep it under the rug, to tell people to toughen up or get over it. But that's starting to change. And the seeds of that change were planted over a century ago by a man who went through hell and decided to build a ladder out of it for everyone else. His name was Clifford Beers. In the early 1900s, Clifford was a recent Yale graduate who, after a period of intense paranoia and depression following the death of his brother, attempted to take his own life. He survived, but his journey was just beginning. He was then committed to some of the finest private and state-run mental institutions in Connecticut. And what he experienced inside those walls was a house of horrors. He was bound in straitjackets for days on end. He was choked by attendants. He was left in isolation, ignored, and treated not as a human being who was suffering, but as an animal to be caged. He saw other patients being beaten, starved, and subjected to torturous so-called treatments. But here's what made Clifford Beers different. Inside that nightmare, something inside him didn't break. It got forged into steel. He secretly began documenting everything. He observed the cruelty, the ignorance, the complete lack of compassion. He realized that the very systems designed to cure people were actually destroying them. After 3 years, he was released, and he had a mission. He was going to expose the truth. In 1908, he published a book that would shock the nation. It was called A Mind That Found Itself. It was a raw, unflinching, first-hand account of his time in the asylums. It became a bestseller. It landed on the desks of doctors, politicians, and philanthropists. It forced America to look in the mirror and confront the barbaric way it was treating its most vulnerable citizens. Clifford didn't just write a book, though. He started a movement. In 1909, he founded what is now known as Mental Health America, an organization dedicated to one radical idea: that people with mental illnesses are human beings who deserve dignity, respect, and proper care. He coined the term mental hygiene, arguing that mental health was just as important as physical health, and that we should be focused on preventing mental illness before it starts, not just locking people away after they break. It was this organization, born from Clifford Beers's own trauma and resilience, that established the very first Mental Health Awareness Week in 1949. That week eventually grew into the Mental Health Awareness Month we know today, observed every May. So when you see that green ribbon, don't just see a color. See Clifford Beers locked in a padded cell vowing to change the world. See the millions of people who suffered in silence before him, and the millions who have found their voice because of him. This isn't just a month. It's a legacy. It's a declaration that our minds are not a source of shame, but a source of strength. It's a promise that we will no longer look away. But the world Clifford Beers was fighting against looks very different from our world today. The asylums may be gone, but they've been replaced by new invisible walls. The algorithms that fuel anxiety, the economic pressures that cause burnout, and the persistent, nagging stigma that still keeps so many of us from raising our hands and saying, "I'm not okay." So how do we tear down these modern walls? What does this fight actually look like in the 21st century? And what is your role in it? The fight today is quieter, more insidious. It's not waged in stone buildings with barred windows, but on a million glowing screens in the dead of night. It's fought in the silent panic of a grocery store checkout line when your card might decline. It's fought in the deafening emptiness of a studio apartment, even while you're connected to thousands of people online. This is the new battlefield of mental health, and its front lines are everywhere. Let's start with the most obvious one: the device in your hand. The internet was supposed to be our great connector, a digital utopia of shared knowledge and community. And in many ways it is. You can find a support group for a rare anxiety disorder at 3 a.m. You can listen to licensed therapists on TikTok demystify complex conditions like ADHD or bipolar disorder. You can see a global celebrity or your favorite YouTuber share their own struggles, making you feel profoundly less alone. This access is revolutionary. It has democratized the conversation and put life-saving information into the hands of people who might never have found it otherwise. But this digital sword has two very sharp edges. For every supportive community, there's a toxic echo chamber. For every piece of sound advice, there are a dozen pieces of dangerous misinformation. And most pervasively, there is the endless, soul-crushing performance of perfection. We live in the age of the highlight reel. We scroll through curated feeds of perfect vacations, flawless bodies, dream job announcements, and picture-perfect families. We are constantly comparing our messy, complicated, behind-the-scenes reality with everyone else's polished, public-facing facade. It's a digital coliseum where we willingly throw our self-esteem into the ring every single day. And the algorithm is designed to keep us there, feeding us more of what makes us feel inadequate, anxious, and envious because that engagement, that emotional reaction is profitable. It's a system that monetizes our insecurity. Studies from institution after institution have drawn a clear, terrifying line between high social media use and increased rates of depression, anxiety, and body dysmorphia, especially among teens and young adults. We're carrying a constant, personalized stream of social pressure in our pockets, a relentless whisper telling us we're not good enough, not successful enough, not happy enough. Tearing down that wall means learning to navigate a world that is intentionally designed to make us feel bad about ourselves. But the fight isn't just digital, it's intensely economic. Let's be brutally honest. It is incredibly difficult to be mentally well when you are financially unwell. The constant, grinding stress of living paycheck to paycheck, of being buried under a mountain of student loan debt, of not knowing if you can afford rent next month, that is not a personal failing. That is a systemic pressure cooker for anxiety and depression. The American dream, for many, has been replaced by the American grind. The pressure to hustle, To have a side gig on top of your full-time job, to monetize your hobbies, to be constantly productive, has blurred the lines between work and life until there's no line left at all. Burnout isn't just a buzzword, it's a public health crisis. It's the physical and emotional exhaustion that comes from prolonged, unmanaged stress. It's the feeling of cynicism and detachment from your own life. And it's thriving in our modern economy. When you're worried about basic survival, food, shelter, healthcare, your brain's threat detection system is always on. You are living in a perpetual state of fight or flight. That chronic stress chemically and physically alters your brain, making you more vulnerable to every single type of mental illness. We cannot talk about mental health in America without talking about economic inequality, the crushing weight of debt, and the fact that for millions, the basic safety net that allows for peace of mind simply isn't there. This brings us to the third front in this modern war: loneliness. It is one of the great paradoxes of our time. We are more connected technologically than any humans in history. We can talk to someone on the other side of the planet in an instant. Yet, we are suffering from a profound epidemic of loneliness. The U.S. Surgeon General has declared it a public health crisis, stating its mortality impact is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. How did we get here? Part of it is the decline of what sociologists call third places. These are the places outside of home, the first place, and work, the second place, where community is built. Community centers, public libraries, parks, local clubs, places of worship, even the neighborhood diner. These spaces have been slowly eroding, replaced by digital interactions or commercialized experiences that don't foster the same deep, spontaneous connections. The rise of remote work, while offering flexibility, has also removed the built-in social structure of the office for millions, leaving them even more isolated. This isn't just about feeling sad. Loneliness is a physiological state. It triggers the same stress responses in the body as financial anxiety. It disrupts sleep, increases inflammation, and compromises our immune systems. We are a social species, hardwired for connection. When we are deprived of it, our minds and our bodies begin to break down. The fight for mental health is therefore also the fight to rebuild our communities, to foster genuine, in-person connection in a world that is increasingly pushing us apart. Finally, the battle is being waged in the American workplace. For decades, the rule was simple: leave your problems at the door. You were a worker, a cog in the machine, and your personal life, your mental state was irrelevant. That is, thankfully, beginning to change. Companies now talk about mental health. They offer wellness apps, meditation sessions, and mental health days. This is a massive step forward. But we have to ask the critical question: is this a genuine cultural shift? Or is it just well-being washing? Is a company truly supporting its employees' mental health if it offers a yoga app, but still expects them to answer emails at 10 p.m. and work through the weekend? Is it a mentally healthy environment if managers talk about empathy but key performance indicators are still tied to unrealistic, soul-crushing productivity quotas? The conversation has started, but the system that creates the burnout often remains unchanged. The modern fight in the corporate world is about moving beyond performative wellness and creating cultures where rest is respected, boundaries are enforced, and psychological safety is treated as a non-negotiable prerequisite, not a trendy perk. So when we look at the 21st century landscape, we see it. The battlefield is our phone. It's our bank account. It's our workplace. It's our own quiet home. The pressures are complex, interconnected, and often invisible. And in the middle of it all stands you, trying to navigate a world that is bombarding you from all sides. The challenges are new, the technology is new, the economic pressures feel more intense than ever. And yet, the single greatest obstacle, the most stubborn and powerful enemy in this fight, is the oldest one of all. It's the same enemy Clifford Beers faced over a century ago: stigma. With all these modern stressors that affect nearly everyone, why is it still so terrifyingly hard to simply say out loud that we're struggling? What is this invisible force that keeps our mouths shut when our minds are screaming? That invisible force has a name, and it's a heavy one: stigma. But just calling it stigma feels too simple, too academic. It doesn't capture the cold weight in your stomach when you think about telling someone what's really going on inside your head. It's not just a word, it's a wall. A wall built brick by brick over centuries, made of fear, misunderstanding, and judgment. And it's a wall that isolates us when we need connection the most. Let's break down this wall. Stigma isn't one solid thing. It comes in layers like a toxic onion. The first layer is the most obvious: public stigma. This is society's problem. It's the collection of negative attitudes and beliefs that motivate the general public to fear, reject, and discriminate against people with mental health conditions. It's the movie villain who's insane. It's the news report that casually links violence with mental illness without any context. It's the whispered joke about the crazy person down the street. It's the assumption that someone with depression is just lazy, or someone with anxiety just needs to calm down. It's the world looking at you and seeing a label, a stereotype, a problem to be avoided, instead of a human being who is hurting. But then there's a deeper, more insidious layer: self-stigma. This is what happens when the poison from the outside seeps in. It's when you start to believe the negative things people say. You internalize the shame. You start to think, maybe I am weak, maybe I am broken, maybe this is my fault. Self-stigma is the voice in your own head that tells you not to ask for help because it's a sign of failure. It's the reason you cancel a therapy appointment because you feel like you should be able to handle it on your own. It's the crushing belief that your struggles make you a burden to your family and friends. This is the most dangerous layer because it turns you against yourself. It becomes your own private jailer, locking you inside your own suffering, convincing you that you deserve to be there. And finally, there's institutional stigma. This is bigger than individuals. It's when the negative attitudes are woven into the very fabric of our systems. It's insurance policies that offer pitiful coverage for mental health care compared to physical health care. It's the lack of mental health resources in schools and rural communities. It's a legal system that is often ill-equipped to deal with individuals in a mental health crisis. It's a corporate culture that preaches work-life balance, but implicitly punishes anyone who admits to struggling. Institutional stigma is the system itself putting up barriers, making it structurally harder for people to get the care they need. So where did all this come from? Why is this wall so tall and so thick in America? The foundation was laid long ago. For centuries, mental illness wasn't seen as a health issue at all. It was viewed as a moral or spiritual failing. People weren't sick. They were possessed by demons, or they were being punished for their sins, or they simply had a weak character. They were locked away in asylums, which were less like hospitals and more like prisons for the socially undesirable. The treatments were often brutal and inhumane, based on the idea that the person needed to be shocked or beaten back into sanity. This history created a deep, primal fear of mental illness, a fear of being labeled, ostracized, and stripped of your humanity. Then, you pour on top of that a uniquely American cultural ideal: the rugged individual, the self-made man, the person who pulls themselves up by their own bootstraps. We are a nation built on a story of grit, independence, and relentless optimism. We celebrate the person who overcomes adversity through sheer force of will. And while that's a powerful narrative, it leaves very little room for the reality of a brain that is sick. You can't bootstrap your way out of a chemical imbalance. You can't use grit to fix faulty neural pathways. When you tell someone with clinical depression to just think positive, it's like telling someone with a broken leg to just walk it off. It's not only unhelpful, it's cruel. It invalidates their experience and reinforces the shameful idea that their illness is a choice, a failure of their will. This cultural pressure to always be strong, to never show weakness, is a massive engine for stigma. It forces millions of Americans to wear a mask of wellness while they are silently falling apart inside. And our media has been a willing accomplice for decades. Think about it. How often have you seen a realistic, compassionate, and nuanced portrayal of mental illness on screen? It's getting better, but for generations, the mentally ill were either violent psychopaths in horror movies, like Norman Bates or Hannibal Lecter, or they were the butt of a joke, the wacky, unpredictable character. These portrayals taught us what to think. They taught us to be afraid. They taught us that people with mental illness are other, unstable, untrustworthy, and fundamentally different from us normal people. When that's the only story you ever see, it's no wonder the public is scared and misinformed. Today, this legacy of stigma shows up in 1,000 different ways. It's baked into our language. We use words like crazy, insane, psycho, nuts, or loony as casual insults. We say things like, "The weather is so bipolar today," or "I'm so OCD about my desk." We've turned serious medical diagnoses into adjectives to describe everyday quirks. And in doing so, we trivialize the real debilitating pain that these conditions cause. We would never say, "My boss is being so cancerous today," or "I'm so diabetic about my candy." We understand that those are serious illnesses. But with mental health, the language of mockery is still fair game. It shows up in our workplaces. The fear of disclosure is immense. Will telling your boss you have anxiety get you passed over for a promotion? Will admitting you're struggling with depression put you on the shortlist for the next round of layoffs? People are terrified that their condition will be misinterpreted as incompetence or unreliability. So they suffer in silence, their productivity plummets, they burn out, and sometimes they lose the very jobs they were trying so desperately to protect. It shows up in our friendships and families. It's the awkward silence that falls over a room when you mention you're seeing a therapist. It's the friends who slowly distance themselves because they just don't know what to say. It's the well-meaning but misguided advice from a relative to just get some fresh air, or pray about it. The isolation is profound. The very people you should be able to lean on for support often become another source of stress, not because they're bad people, but because they are also products of a society steeped in stigma. And for many, this stigma is compounded by their identity. In some cultures, there's an intense pressure to keep family problems private, making mental illness a source of deep shame. For men, the toxic ideals of masculinity can make it feel impossible to admit to any emotional vulnerability, equating it with weakness. For people of color, there can be a deep-seated distrust of a medical system that has historically mistreated them, creating another barrier to seeking help. Stigma is not a one-size-fits-all problem. It has unique and painful expressions in every community. All of this creates a vicious, self-perpetuating cycle. Stigma creates fear and shame. Fear and shame lead to silence. Silence prevents people from seeking help. The lack of help allows the illness to get worse. A worsening illness can lead to job loss, broken relationships, or a public crisis. And that crisis, when viewed by an uninformed public, reinforces the original negative stereotype. The snake eats its own tail, and the wall of stigma gets one brick higher. So if this invisible wall is this old, this high, and this deeply embedded in our culture, how do we even begin to tear it down? Is it even possible to dismantle something so powerful? The answer is yes. And it starts not with a wrecking ball but with a single conversation. That conversation doesn't have to be a public declaration. It doesn't have to be a speech in front of thousands. It can be a text message to a friend, a quiet talk with a family member. It can be admitting, maybe for the first time just to yourself, that you're not okay. Because stigma, for all its towering ancient power, has an Achilles heel. It's built on a foundation of silence. And a single voice speaking a single truth can create a crack in that foundation. And sometimes one crack is all it takes for the whole rotten structure to start coming down. This isn't just a hopeful metaphor. It's the literal history of the mental health movement in the United States. It all started with one man, one voice, and one conversation that he forced a nation to have. His name was Clifford Whittingham Beers. And in the early 1900s, he was the model of American success. A recent graduate of Yale University, sharp, ambitious, with a promising future on Wall Street. But beneath the surface, a storm was brewing. Following a period of intense stress and paranoia, exacerbated by the illness and death of his brother, Beers's mental health plummeted. He became convinced he had epilepsy, a condition his brother had, and was overwhelmed by delusions. The crisis culminated in a suicide attempt, a desperate leap from a fourth-story window. He survived, but his life as he knew it was over. He was committed to a private mental institution. And for the next 3 years, Clifford Beers, the Yale graduate, the promising businessman, would journey through the Dante's Inferno of America's mental health care system at the turn of the 20th century. What he experienced was not care. It was a nightmare. He was bound in a straitjacket for nights on end, the canvas cinched so tight it cut off his circulation. He was choked, beaten, and thrown into padded cells by attendants who treated him less like a patient and more like a wild animal. He saw other patients subjected to the same brutalities, their cries for help echoing in the halls, unheard and unanswered. The so-called moral treatment of the previous century had decayed into a system of custodial punishment. The asylums weren't sanctuaries, they were prisons. And the people inside were not seen as sick, but as broken, inconvenient, and disposable. But something remarkable happened to Clifford Beers in the depths of that despair. His mind, though besieged by illness, was still sharp. He began to observe, to document. He wasn't just a patient. He became a secret journalist, a sociologist of suffering. He watched the way the system was designed not to heal but to contain. He saw how the stigma he'd felt on the outside was institutionalized and weaponized on the inside. He realized that the greatest cruelty wasn't just the physical abuse, but the profound, soul-crushing dehumanization. He was a man with a mind that was ill, But he was treated as if he had no mind at all. Upon his release, Beers could have done what most people would have done. He could have tried to forget. He could have buried the trauma, changed his name and started a new life, desperate to escape the shame and stigma associated with his experience. But he didn't. He did the exact opposite. He decided to start a conversation. The loudest, most public, most unavoidable conversation he possibly could. He picked up a pen and began to write. In 1908, he published his autobiography, A Mind That Found Itself. It was an explosive, meticulously detailed account of his time in the asylums. It was raw, unflinching, and utterly damning. He named names. He described procedures. He exposed the rot at the core of the system. The book was a sensation. It landed on the desks of the most powerful people in America, from President Theodore Roosevelt to the pioneering psychologist William James, who called it a classic account of an insane man's experience and a story of heroism. Beers's book was the single conversation that broke the nation's silence. For the first time, the public was given an insider's view of what really happened behind the locked doors of the asylum. It wasn't a doctor's clinical assessment or a politician's detached report. It was a human story of survival. It forced people to confront a terrifying reality. The person suffering in that straitjacket wasn't some nameless, faceless lunatic. It was a Yale graduate. Could be their brother, their son, their neighbor. Could be them. But Clifford Beers knew a book wasn't enough. A conversation had to lead to action. Fueled by the public outcry his story generated, he channeled the momentum into creating an organization. In 1909, along with William James and other prominent figures, he founded the National Committee for Mental Hygiene. Today, we know it as Mental Health America, one of the leading advocacy organizations in the country. This was the birth of the modern mental health movement in the United States. A movement founded not by doctors or politicians, but by a former patient, a survivor. The term they used, mental hygiene, sounds a bit dated to our ears, but the concept was revolutionary. The idea was to apply the principles of public health and sanitation hygiene to the mind. It proposed that mental illness wasn't a moral failing or a sign of divine punishment that you just locked away. It was an illness like any other. And just like physical illnesses, it could be studied, it could be treated, and most importantly, it could be prevented. This was a seismic shift in thinking. It was the first organized attempt to reframe mental health not as a matter of institutional control, but as a matter of public health and individual well-being. It was the first time an organization truly dedicated itself to fighting stigma on a national scale. For decades, this new movement worked tirelessly, lobbying for reform, promoting scientific research, and trying to change public perception. But they knew that to truly dismantle the wall of stigma, they needed to reach everyday people in their communities. They needed to turn their national conversation into millions of smaller local ones. So, in 1949, the organization that Beers founded took a landmark step. They launched the first ever Mental Health Week. The goal was simple but audacious: to focus the entire nation's attention, for 1 week a year, on the topic of mental health. They distributed pamphlets, organized lectures, and worked with newspapers and radio stations to spread a message that was, at the time, radical. A message that said mental illness is real, it's common, and recovery is possible. It was a call to arms for compassion, for understanding, and for the rejection of shame. That 1 week eventually grew into what we now know as Mental Health Awareness Month. Think about that. The entire concept of setting aside the month of May to talk about mental health, the green ribbons, the social media campaigns, the community events, it can all be traced back to a direct, unbroken line. It starts with one man, Clifford Beers, surviving an unspeakable ordeal. It continues with his decision to speak out, to turn his personal trauma into a public testimony. And it results in a national movement dedicated to the simple, powerful idea that our minds are just as important as our bodies, and that no one should ever have to suffer in silence. The battle he started is far from over. The stigma he fought against still lingers in the shadows of our society. But what he proved beyond any doubt is the incredible power of a single story to change the world. He lit a match in the darkness of the early 20th century, but the fire he started would have to survive decades of scientific revolutions, social upheaval, and political battles. The fight for the mind had only just begun, and the next few decades would test its limits in ways no one could have ever imagined. The mid-20th century dawned on an America that believed it had conquered the world. Soldiers returned from World War II not just as victors, but as heroes building a new suburban paradise. The economy boomed, Houses sprang up with white picket fences, and the family car became a symbol of limitless possibility. But behind the closed doors of these brand new homes, a silent epidemic was festering. The men who had stormed the beaches of Normandy and fought in the jungles of the Pacific brought the war home in their minds. They suffered from what was then crudely called shell shock or battle fatigue. Unseen wounds that manifested as nightmares, explosive anger, or a soul-crushing emptiness that the new prosperity couldn't fill. Their wives, often isolated in these new suburbs and constrained by rigid social expectations, battled what was dismissed as hysteria or nerves, a deep, pervasive depression and anxiety with no name and no outlet. America had a pristine public image to maintain, and this psychological turmoil was a smudge on the portrait. The solution was the same as it had been for a century: hide it away. The asylums, now rebranded as state mental hospitals, were more crowded than ever. They were monolithic, underfunded warehouses for the mentally ill, where treatment was often little more than containment. But inside a French laboratory in the early 1950s, a discovery was made that would accidentally dynamite the very foundations of this system. Scientists developing a new anesthetic noticed a peculiar side effect. It had a profound calming effect on agitated patients. This chemical, chlorpromazine, would be brought to the United States and marketed under the brand name Thorazine. It wasn't a cure, but for the first time in human history, there was a medicine that could effectively manage the severe symptoms of psychosis. It was hailed as a miracle, a chemical lobotomy. For doctors and families, Thorazine and the wave of antipsychotic and antidepressant drugs that followed felt like the key that could finally unlock the asylum doors from the inside. The logic seemed irrefutable. If a patient's most disruptive symptoms could be controlled with a pill, why did they need to be locked away in a massive, isolated institution for their entire lives? This scientific breakthrough collided with a powerful social and political movement. A growing chorus of journalists, advocates, and former patients were exposing the horrific conditions inside state hospitals: the overcrowding, the abuse, the sheer hopelessness. The public was becoming aware that these institutions were not places of healing, but of human misery. This wave of change crested in 1963, when a young charismatic president stepped before Congress and delivered a speech that would change the course of American mental health care forever. John F. Kennedy, whose own sister Rosemary had been tragically lobotomized, spoke with a passion born from personal experience. He called for a bold new approach, declaring that the reliance on custodial institutions must be replaced. He envisioned a future where mental illness would be treated not in remote, forbidding asylums, but in the heart of the community. His vision was the Community Mental Health Act, a landmark piece of legislation that authorized federal funding for the creation of community-based mental health centers all across the nation. The dream was beautiful. It was compassionate. It was revolutionary. These new centers would provide a whole spectrum of care: outpatient therapy, crisis intervention, medication management, and support services. Patients could live at home, hold jobs, and be part of their communities while receiving the treatment they needed. The act passed, and the great emptying of the asylums began, a process called deinstitutionalization. Over the next 2 decades, the populations of state mental hospitals would plummet by over 75%. Doors that had been locked for a century swung open, and hundreds of thousands of people walked out into the sunlight. But the dream was built on a promise that was never kept. The vision of a comprehensive, nationwide network of community centers required one crucial thing: money, and the political will to spend it. The initial federal funding was meant to be seed money, with states and local governments expected to pick up the cost over time. But then the political wind shifted. The nation became embroiled in the Vietnam War, a conflict that devoured the national budget and attention. Economic recession squeezed state finances. The tough-on-crime rhetoric of the 1970s and 80s began to take hold, shifting public priorities from social services to law enforcement. As a result, only about half of the planned community mental health centers were ever actually built. And those that were built were often chronically underfunded and understaffed, completely unequipped to handle the complex needs of the severely mentally ill people who were now, quite literally, on their doorstep. The system was dismantled before its replacement was ever fully constructed. And so, one of the most well-intentioned social policies in American history led to one of its greatest tragedies. With the asylums closed and the community centers failing, hundreds of thousands of the most vulnerable people in the country were left with nowhere to go. They had been liberated from the hospital wards only to be abandoned to the streets. The promise of community care dissolved into a reality of homelessness, poverty, and isolation. People who once would have been patients in a hospital were now sleeping in alleyways and under bridges. And when their untreated symptoms, delusions, paranoia, erratic behavior, caused them to run afoul of the law, they found a new institution waiting to house them. Police officers with little to no training in mental health became the new frontline responders. And the final destination was no longer the hospital, but the county jail. In a cruel twist of history, the largest mental health facilities in the United States were no longer hospitals at all. They were prisons. The Cook County Jail in Chicago, the Los Angeles County Jail, Rikers Island in New York. These became the new asylums, housing more mentally ill individuals than any psychiatric hospital in the country. While this societal disaster was unfolding at home, a new generation of soldiers was being sent into the jungles of Vietnam. They faced a brutal, morally ambiguous war, and they returned home not to ticker tape parades, but to a divided and often hostile nation. They carried with them the psychological scars of guerrilla warfare, trauma that the medical establishment still had no real name for. It wasn't shell shock anymore, but it was just as devastating. The concept of post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, wouldn't be formally recognized by the psychiatric community until 1980. For years, these veterans suffered in silence, their invisible wounds dismissed as character flaws or personal weakness. This perfect storm of failed policy, social neglect, and the trauma of war created a deep crisis of faith. The public's perception of mental health care was shattered. On one hand, you had the terrifying image, immortalized in films like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, of the mental institution as an oppressive tool of conformity. On the other, you had the very real and visible failure of deinstitutionalization playing out on city streets. The system seemed to offer only two terrible choices: imprisonment in an institution or abandonment to the streets. The trust was gone. The hope that had surged in the early 60s had curdled into cynicism and fear, leaving a broken system and millions of people stranded in the wreckage. A new approach was desperately needed, one that could rebuild that trust and offer a third path, but it would have to rise from the ashes of this catastrophic failure. That third path, that glimmer of hope, would be championed by the most powerful man in the world, and it was fueled not just by policy, but by personal tragedy. In October of 1963, President John F. Kennedy stood before Congress and delivered a speech that would fundamentally alter the landscape of mental health care in America. He spoke of a bold new approach, one that would move away from the cold, distant asylum and bring care back into the heart of the community. For Kennedy, this wasn't an abstract issue. It was deeply, painfully personal. His own sister, Rosemary, had been subjected to one of the most brutal procedures of the era, a prefrontal lobotomy, at the age of 23. The operation, meant to calm her mood swings and intellectual disabilities, was a catastrophic failure. It left her with the mental capacity of a toddler, unable to walk or speak intelligibly, and she would spend the rest of her life institutionalized, hidden away from the public eye. Kennedy had witnessed firsthand the devastating consequences of a system that treated human beings as problems to be managed, rather than as people to be helped. Fueled by this private grief and a public sense of duty, he signed into law the Community Mental Health Act of 1963. This was the blueprint for that third path. The vision was revolutionary, almost utopian in its ambition. The law allocated federal funding, the first of its kind for mental health, to create a nationwide network of community mental health centers, or CMHCs. The goal was to build 1,500 of these centers across the country, ensuring that no American was ever too far from help. These weren't supposed to be just clinics. They were envisioned as vibrant hubs of support, woven into the fabric of daily life. The plan was comprehensive. Each center was mandated to provide 5 essential services: inpatient care for short-term stays, outpatient care for ongoing therapy, partial hospitalization for those who needed structured support during the day, but could go home at night, emergency services available 24/7, and consultation and education for the community to promote mental wellness and prevent illness. The idea was to create a continuum of care to meet people where they were. You wouldn't have to be shipped off to a remote institution, severed from your family, your job, your life. Help would be right there, down the street, as accessible as a public library or a fire station. It was a promise to replace isolation with integration, custody with therapy, and despair with hope. In the beginning, it felt like a new dawn. The federal government was pouring money into construction, and centers began to spring up. For the first time, mental health was being treated as a public health issue, a community responsibility, not a private shame to be hidden behind high walls. The deinstitutionalization movement now had a destination for the people leaving the asylums. The theory was perfect. As the state hospitals emptied, the community centers would be there to catch them, providing the support they needed to build new lives. It was supposed to be a seamless transition, a humane and rational solution to a century of neglect. But a beautiful blueprint is not the same as a finished building. And the foundation of this grand vision had a fatal crack running through it from the very start. The federal money, the lifeblood of the entire project, was only intended to be seed money. The plan was for the federal government to fund the initial setup and staffing for a few years, after which the financial responsibility would shift to the states and local communities. It was a model built on a cascade of assumptions: that states would have the budget, that local communities would have the tax base, and most importantly, that the political will to fund mental health care would remain strong year after year. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. Just as the program was getting off the ground, America's attention and its treasury were being diverted thousands of miles away. The escalating war in Vietnam became a voracious black hole for federal funding. Guns, it turned out, were a higher priority than butter, and certainly a higher priority than mental health. The Johnson administration's Great Society programs, which the CMHCs were part of, were squeezed for every penny. The promised river of federal funding slowed to a trickle, and the states, many already facing their own budget crises, were either unwilling or unable to make up the massive shortfall. The grand vision of 1,500 fully staffed centers crumbled. In the end, only about 750 were ever built, half of the original goal. And the ones that did open were often a shadow of what was intended. They were chronically underfunded, understaffed, and completely overwhelmed. Instead of the full suite of 5 essential services, many could only afford to offer basic outpatient counseling. The 24/7 emergency services, the partial hospitalization, the crucial support systems for those with the most severe mental illnesses, they were often the first things to be cut. The centers ended up serving what professionals called the worried well, people with less severe conditions like anxiety or marital problems who were easier and cheaper to treat. Meanwhile, the very population they were designed to help, the thousands of people being discharged from state hospitals with severe and persistent illnesses like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, were left stranded. This created the perfect storm for a new kind of human tragedy. The state hospitals, seeing the Community Mental Health Act as a green light, accelerated their closures. They pushed patients out the door, sometimes with little more than a bus ticket and a bottle of medication, under the assumption that the community centers would take over. But in many communities, the centers didn't exist. Or if they did, they had no capacity to handle the complex needs of this population. These individuals, many of whom had spent decades in institutions and had no family or social support, were left to fend for themselves. They were discharged not into a community of care, but into a vacuum of neglect. The result was a humanitarian crisis that unfolded in plain sight on the streets of America. Homelessness among people with severe mental illness skyrocketed. Without structured support and consistent access to medication, their conditions worsened. They became trapped in a brutal revolving door, from the streets to the emergency room to a short-term psychiatric hold, and then back to the streets. Jails and prisons by default became the new asylums. Sheriffs and police officers with no training in mental health became the frontline caregivers. By the 1980s, the failure was undeniable. The well-intentioned dream of community care had, for the most vulnerable, turned into a nightmare of abandonment. But out of this wreckage, a new and powerful force began to emerge. It was a movement born not in the halls of Congress or the offices of psychiatrists, but in the living rooms of families who were watching their loved ones suffer. They were tired of the blame, the stigma, and the broken promises. They were told their son's schizophrenia or their daughter's depression was a result of bad parenting. They were shut out of treatment decisions and ignored by a system that was failing at every level. In 1979, 2 mothers, Harriet Shetler and Beverly Young, sat around a kitchen table in Madison, Wisconsin, and decided they had had enough. They formed a small group of families which soon grew into a national organization, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, or NAMI. At the same time, people who had been through the system themselves, people who called themselves psychiatric survivors or consumers, began to organize. They rejected the passive label of patient and demanded to be seen as experts in their own experience. They fought for their civil rights, protesting against forced treatment and advocating for humane recovery-oriented care. This was the birth of the modern mental health advocacy movement. It was a seismic shift. For the first time, the people most affected by mental illness, individuals and their families, were demanding a seat at the table. They weren't just asking for better services. They were fighting to completely reframe the conversation, to transform a system of control into a system of support, and to drag the topic of mental illness out of the shadows and into the light. And this light, once lit, began to spread. It wasn't an overnight explosion, but a slow, determined burn, fueled by the courage of those who refused to stay silent. This fight for visibility, this demand to be seen as human beings worthy of dignity and care, created the very foundation for what we now know as Mental Health Awareness Month. Because once you drag a problem into the light, you have to do something about it. You have to talk about it, consistently, publicly. The year was 1949. The world was rebuilding from the ashes of a global war. Soldiers were returning home, not just with physical wounds, but with what was then called shell shock or combat fatigue, the invisible injuries we now understand as post-traumatic stress disorder. In this post-war climate, the organization founded by Clifford Beers, now known as Mental Health America, decided it was time to make a stand. They designated the first week of May as Mental Health Week. It was a radical idea for its time. Think about it. This wasn't a week to celebrate a historical event or a national holiday. It was a week dedicated to acknowledging a part of the human experience that society had spent centuries trying to lock away, ignore, and forget. In those early years, awareness looked vastly different than it does today. There were no viral TikToks, no celebrity endorsements, no corporate partnerships. Awareness was a mimeographed pamphlet handed out at a community health fair. It was a guest speaker from the local clinic visiting a Rotary Club meeting. It was a grainy black and white public service announcement that aired late at night, urging people to understand that mental illness was, in fact, an illness, not a moral failing. The language was often clinical, a bit detached, using terms like mental hygiene, a phrase that sounds strange to our modern ears, but at the time was a revolutionary attempt to frame mental health in the same way as physical health. Something you could tend to, something you could work to maintain. For decades, this was the rhythm of the movement. A slow, steady drumbeat of local events, educational materials, and quiet advocacy. It was crucial foundational work, but it was happening largely within the established medical and community frameworks. The conversation was still primarily led by doctors, therapists, and social workers talking about people with mental health conditions. The voices of those with lived experience were still largely on the margins. Then everything changed. The change wasn't a new law or a medical breakthrough. It was a technological one. It was the dial-up modem, the personal computer, the birth of the internet. Suddenly, in the late 80s and early 90s, the world began to connect in ways that were previously unimaginable. And in the quiet corners of this new digital world, on bulletin board systems, in Usenet groups, and in early AOL chat rooms, something profound began to happen. People who had felt utterly alone in their struggles found each other. A teenager in Ohio struggling with an eating disorder could anonymously talk to someone in California who knew exactly what she was going through. A veteran in Texas grappling with panic attacks could find a community of others who understood the triggers, the fear, the feeling of a body betraying itself. This was the beginning of a seismic shift. The power to tell the story was moving from the institution to the individual. The personal narrative, raw and unfiltered, became the most powerful tool in the fight for awareness. It was no longer a doctor describing the symptoms of depression. It was a person describing the weight of it, the color of it, the way it stole the taste from their food and the joy from their life. This was a new kind of light. Not the sterile light of a clinic, but the warm, flickering light of a shared human story. As these stories multiplied, the movement gained a new energy, a new face. And it gained a symbol, the green ribbon. Green was chosen for a reason. It's the color of spring, of new life, of renewal and growth. It symbolized a new beginning, a fresh start in the conversation around mental health. In the 1990s, people started wearing these simple loops of green fabric. It was a quiet signal, a nod of solidarity. It said, "I see you." It said, "You are not alone." It said, "This matters to me." It was a way to make the invisible visible. This new wave of personal storytelling and symbolic unity began to breach the walls of mainstream culture. And a powerful new type of advocate emerged, the celebrity. When influential figures, people who seemingly had it all, fame, wealth, success, began to speak openly about their own struggles, it was a game changer. It shattered the myth that mental illness was a sign of weakness or a consequence of a failed life. When a beloved actor admitted to battling depression, or a world-class athlete spoke about performance anxiety, it sent a powerful message. This can happen to anyone. It forced people to reevaluate their own prejudices. It was one thing to dismiss the struggles of a stranger. It was another to dismiss the pain of a person you admired, a person you felt you knew. This growing cultural acceptance paved the way for Mental Health Week to officially expand into Mental Health Awareness Month. The conversation was getting too big, too important to be contained in just 7 days. It needed more space, more time. And that brings us to the modern era, where the landscape of mental health awareness is almost unrecognizable from its humble beginnings in 1949. In May, you now see the green ribbon everywhere. You see it on NFL helmets, on social media profiles, in the windows of major corporations. You see hashtags with billions of views. You see online therapy ads on podcasts and television. The conversation has moved from the fringes to the absolute center of our cultural discourse. This mainstreaming is, in many ways, a monumental victory. It's the culmination of decades of relentless fighting by activists, patients, and families. The fact that a Fortune 500 company feels the need to release a statement in support of mental health is a direct result of the work done by those who were once locked away in asylums. It's a sign that the stigma, while not gone, has been significantly wounded. But it also introduces a new set of complex questions. When an issue becomes mainstream, it also becomes marketable. How do we distinguish between genuine support and mental health washing, where organizations use the language of wellness for public relations without making any meaningful changes to support their own employees or communities? When everyone is talking, how do we ensure that the most vulnerable voices, the ones who struggled for so long to be heard, aren't drowned out by the noise? Now that the topic is out of the shadows and fully in the light, the challenge is no longer just about starting the conversation. The challenge is about the quality of that conversation. It's about moving beyond simple awareness, beyond just knowing that mental health is important, and into a deeper understanding of what it truly means to build a mentally healthy society. It's about looking at the systems that impact our well-being, our workplaces, our schools, our healthcare system, our communities, because the goal was never just to talk about the problem. The goal was, and still is, to solve it. So how do we do it? How do we move from simply acknowledging the crisis to actively building the solution? It happens by redesigning the very environments where we spend our lives. Let's start with the American workplace. For generations, the prevailing attitude was simple. Leave your personal problems at the door. Work was a place for stoicism. You powered through. Burnout wasn't a diagnosis. It was a badge of honor, a sign you were a hard worker. This model is not just outdated, it's economically disastrous. It leads to high turnover, rampant absenteeism, and a phenomenon called presenteeism, where employees are physically at their desks but mentally and emotionally checked out, producing a fraction of their best work. The cost to American businesses is estimated to be in the hundreds of billions of dollars annually. The solution isn't about putting a ping-pong table in the break room. It's about a fundamental cultural shift towards psychological safety. This is a term coined by Harvard Business School professor Amy Edmondson, and it means creating an environment where employees feel safe enough to take risks, to ask for help, to admit a mistake, and yes, to say, "I'm not okay today," without fear of being penalized or viewed as weak. Forward-thinking companies are already implementing this. They're offering dedicated mental health days, no questions asked. They're training managers to spot the signs of burnout and to have compassionate, supportive conversations. They're investing in employee assistance programs or EAPs, and this is the crucial part, they're actively destigmatizing their use, so employees see them as a resource, not a last resort. They're promoting flexible work schedules that acknowledge people are not machines. They are caregivers, parents, and human beings with lives outside their job title. This isn't charity. It's a strategic imperative. A company that prioritizes the mental well-being of its people will attract and retain the best talent, foster more innovation, and ultimately, be more successful. The new American workplace understands that the most valuable asset isn't its product. It's the minds of the people who create it. Now let's look at our schools. For too long, a child's disruptive behavior in class was seen purely as a disciplinary issue. A student who couldn't focus was labeled lazy. A kid who acted out was called a troublemaker. We were treating the symptoms, not the cause. We now understand that so much of this behavior is a direct expression of underlying anxiety, trauma, or depression. A child who has experienced instability at home doesn't just magically switch it off when the school bell rings. The solution is to stop asking, "What's wrong with you?" and start asking, "What happened to you?" This is the core of trauma-informed education, and it's transforming classrooms across the country. The most powerful tool in this transformation is social and emotional learning, or SEL. Think of it as gym class for your emotions. It's a curriculum that, from kindergarten onwards, teaches children the vocabulary to identify their feelings. It gives them the tools to manage stress, to resolve conflicts peacefully, and to develop empathy for their peers. This isn't soft stuff. This is as fundamental as learning multiplication tables or the rules of grammar. In a world of increasing complexity and online pressures, emotional intelligence is not a bonus. It's a prerequisite for a successful life. Schools are becoming the front line of mental health care for our youth. They're hiring on-site therapists, creating calm-down corners in classrooms, and integrating mental health check-ins into the school day. It's a monumental task, especially with schools already stretched thin, but the alternative is unthinkable. By investing in the mental health of our children today, we are preventing a crisis of mentally unhealthy adults tomorrow. We are building a foundation of resilience that will last a lifetime. Next, we have to talk about the healthcare system itself, which has historically treated mental health as a separate, lesser category of medicine. Your insurance might cover a broken leg without a second thought, but therapy? That was often a bureaucratic nightmare of pre-authorizations, limited sessions, and a tiny network of in-network providers. We created a system that acted as if the head was completely disconnected from the rest of the body, a bizarre and dangerous fiction. We know with absolute certainty that mental health and physical health are inextricably linked. Chronic stress worsens heart disease. Depression weakens the immune system. Untreated trauma can manifest as chronic pain. The solution is integrated care. It's a simple but revolutionary idea. Mental health care should be a standard, accessible part of your regular medical experience. Imagine going to your primary care doctor for an annual physical, and along with checking your blood pressure and cholesterol, they give you a routine screening for depression and anxiety. If you screen positive, they don't just hand you a pamphlet and wish you luck. They have a behavioral health specialist right there, in the same clinic, who can talk to you that very day. This model breaks down barriers of stigma, cost, and access. It makes seeking help for your mind as normal as seeking help for your body. And one of the biggest leaps forward in this area is something you've probably seen on billboards or buses. 988. Launched in 2022, the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is the mental health equivalent of 911. It's a free, confidential 24/7 service that anyone in the United States can call or text to connect with a trained crisis counselor. This is a systemic game changer. It provides an immediate, easy-to-remember entry point into the crisis care system, diverting people from overwhelmed emergency rooms or, in some cases, encounters with law enforcement who aren't trained to handle a psychiatric crisis. 988 is more than a phone number. It's a declaration that a mental health emergency is a medical emergency, and it deserves an immediate, professional, and compassionate response. Alongside this, the rise of telehealth has been a revolution in accessibility, allowing someone in a rural town with no local therapist to connect with a specialist hundreds of miles away, all from the privacy of their own home. We are slowly but surely stitching the mind and body back together within our healthcare system. Finally, we need to look at our communities and the technology that connects them. The paradox of the modern age is that we are more digitally connected than ever, yet rates of loneliness and social isolation are at an all-time high. Loneliness is a public health crisis, with a mortality impact comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. The solution isn't to abandon technology, but to use it, and our physical communities, with more intention. It's about building a robust social infrastructure. This means investing in public spaces like parks, libraries, and community centers where people can gather and form organic connections. It means supporting local clubs, volunteer organizations, and neighborhood groups that create a sense of belonging. Online, it means moving beyond the passive, comparison-driven scrolling of traditional social media and into more active, supportive digital spaces. There are now apps that connect new mothers struggling with postpartum depression, private forums for veterans coping with PTSD, and Discord servers for teenagers navigating their identity. These digital campfires provide a sense of community for people who might be geographically isolated or feel like no one in their immediate circle understands what they're going through. Creators and influencers sharing their own mental health journeys on platforms like YouTube or TikTok are reaching millions, chipping away at stigma with every vulnerable post. Technology can be an accelerant for our worst impulses, but it can also be a powerful tool for connection, education, and healing. workplaces that prioritize people, schools that teach emotional skills, healthcare that treats the whole person, and communities that foster genuine connection. These aren't pipe dreams. They are the tangible, actionable solutions currently being built across the United States. This is what the next stage of the mental health movement looks like. And Mental Health Awareness Month serves as our annual progress report, a time to highlight these innovations, to challenge the systems that are lagging behind, and to remind ourselves that a healthier future isn't just possible, it's already under construction. These are the blueprints for a mentally healthier nation. But a blueprint is useless until someone picks up a hammer. And that's where you come in. That hammer isn't a piece of legislation or a billion-dollar tech startup. It's a conversation. It's a moment of self-compassion. It's the decision to check in on a friend. It's the courage to share your own story, or the grace to listen to someone else's. The most powerful tools for building a mentally healthier America are already in your hands. The real work begins not in the halls of Congress, but in our living rooms, our workplaces, and in the quiet, often unseen chambers of our own minds. So let's start there. With you. Because before you can be an advocate for anyone else, you have to be an advocate for yourself. This isn't selfish, it's foundational. Think of it like the safety demonstration on an airplane. You have to put on your own oxygen mask before you can help the person next to you. Your mental health is your oxygen. For too long, we've treated self-care as a luxury, an indulgence. It's not. It's a necessity. It's the daily maintenance that keeps your engine running. This doesn't mean you need to spend a fortune on wellness retreats or meditate for an hour every morning. It starts smaller. It's recognizing what drains you and what recharges you. It's the 5 minutes you take to step away from your desk and just breathe. It's the decision to turn off the news notifications on your phone for a few hours to give your nervous system a break from the constant barrage of outrage and anxiety. It's choosing to go to bed 30 minutes earlier instead of scrolling through an endless feed of curated perfection that makes you feel inadequate. It's going for a walk, not because you need to burn calories, but because moving your body is one of the most powerful ways to change your brain chemistry and clear your head. It's learning to say no to things that stretch you too thin, and understanding that no is a complete sentence. It's about building a life that doesn't constantly require you to escape from it. Tending to your own mental health is the first, most crucial swing of the hammer. Once your own foundation is a little more stable, you can start looking outward. And this is where the ripple effect begins. This is where you become a force for change in the lives of others. The most common question people ask is, what do I say? What do I do if I think someone is struggling? We're so afraid of saying the wrong thing that we often say nothing at all. And silence is the oxygen that stigma breathes. So let's demystify it. The single most powerful tool you have to help someone is not your advice. It's your attention. It's your ability to listen. I mean, truly listen. Not listening to respond, not listening to fix, but listening to understand. Imagine a friend tells you, "I'm just so overwhelmed lately. I feel like I'm failing at everything." The instinct for many of us is to jump into problem-solving mode. "Oh, you should try making a to-do list." Or, "Have you tried yoga?" Or, "You just need to be more positive." While well-intentioned, this often does more harm than good. It can feel dismissive, as if their complex emotional state has a simple one-step solution that they just weren't smart enough to figure out. Instead, try this. You listen. You hold space for their feelings. And you validate them. Validation doesn't mean you agree with their perspective. It means you accept that their feelings are real for them. You say things like, "That sounds incredibly difficult," or, "I'm so sorry you're going through that," or, "It makes sense that you'd feel that way, given everything on your plate." You are offering a safe harbor, not a repair shop. You are communicating one of the most profound messages a human can receive. You are not alone, and you are not crazy for feeling this way. In that moment, you lift a small piece of their burden. Language is another powerful tool. The words we use shape our reality and the reality of those around us. Make a conscious choice to shift your vocabulary. Instead of saying someone is bipolar, say they have bipolar disorder. A person is not their diagnosis. Instead of using casual, stigmatizing terms like crazy, insane, or psycho, find a more accurate word. This isn't about being politically correct. It's about being precise and compassionate. It's about recognizing that mental health conditions are medical issues, not character flaws. Every time you use person-first, non-stigmatizing language, you chip away at the wall of shame that prevents people from seeking help. And when you do see the signs that a friend or loved one is in deep distress, withdrawing, changes in behavior, expressing feelings of hopelessness, your role is not to be their therapist. Your role is to be a bridge to professional help. You can say, "I'm really concerned about you and I think it might be helpful to talk to someone who's trained for this. Can I help you find a therapist? Can I sit with you while you make the call?" You can familiarize yourself with resources like the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Knowing these resources and being willing to share them is like having a fire extinguisher in your house. You hope you never have to use it, but you're prepared if you do. This work of building a better future extends beyond our one-on-one interactions. It moves into our communities. Think about your workplace. Is it a place where it's safe to talk about burnout and stress? Or is mental health treated as a liability? You can be the person who starts the conversation. Ask your HR department about the company's employee assistance program. Advocate for policies that support mental well-being, like flexible hours or dedicated mental health days. When a leader is open about their own struggles, it gives permission for everyone else to be human too. You can champion a culture where taking a mental health day is seen not as a weakness, but as a responsible act of professional maintenance, just like getting the flu shot. Think about our schools, where the next generation is navigating unprecedented pressures. You can support funding for more school counselors. You can advocate for mental health education to be part of the curriculum, teaching kids emotional literacy and coping skills right alongside math and history. When we give young people the language to understand their inner world, we give them a map that will serve them for the rest of their lives. And then there's our digital world. Our online spaces can be incredibly toxic, but they can also be powerful communities for support and connection. You can choose to be a force for good. Instead of engaging with trolls, block them. Instead of sharing outrage bait, share reliable information from trusted mental health organizations. Curate your own feed to protect your peace. Unfollow accounts that make you feel worse about yourself, and follow those that inspire and educate you. Every like, every share, every comment is a small vote for the kind of online world you want to live in. Each of these actions, a moment of self-care, a listening ear, a change in language, an email to HR, might feel small on its own. It might feel like a single drop of water in a vast, thirsty desert. But that's not how change works. Change works like ripples in a pond. Your single act of compassion creates a ripple. The person you listen to feels seen and, in turn, has the strength to listen to someone else. That creates another ripple. The supportive policy you advocated for at work helps a colleague get the care they need, and they bring that healthier version of themselves home to their family. More ripples. The article you shared online is seen by a stranger who finally recognizes their own struggle and makes a call to a therapist. The pond is now filled with overlapping, intersecting waves of change, all starting from a single intentional act. You are not just a drop in the ocean. You are the start of a new current. These are the tools. This is the work. It's practical, it's accessible, and it's available to every single one of us right now. We have the blueprints for a better system, and now we have the hammers for the grassroots construction. But what are we building towards? What does that finished structure actually look like? What is the vision of a mentally healthy America that we are fighting for, one conversation, one connection, one act of courage at a time? That vision, that finished structure of a mentally healthy America, isn't some far-off utopian dream. It's a tangible, achievable reality built on a foundation of empathy and action. It looks like a country where our mental health is treated with the exact same seriousness, the same proactive care as our physical health. Imagine for a moment what that actually feels like. It feels like schools where social-emotional learning isn't a special program, but is woven into the very fabric of the curriculum, as fundamental as reading and math. It's where a child learns to identify and regulate their emotions with the same proficiency they learn to solve an equation. It's where teachers are equipped not just to spot the signs of distress, but to create classrooms that are sanctuaries of psychological safety, where a student taking a mental health day is met with the same understanding as a student home with the flu, because we finally, collectively, understand that the brain is part of the body. In this future, our workplaces are transformed. The relentless grind of hustle culture is replaced by a culture of sustainable performance and genuine well-being. It's a world where leaders don't just talk about mental health, they model it. They take their vacation days. They speak openly about their own struggles with stress and burnout. It's where asking for help is seen not as a weakness, but as a strategic strength. Where employee benefits include robust, easily accessible mental health care, and a team check-in includes the question, how are you doing as a human being? Not just what's the status on your project. It's a workplace that recognizes that a healthy mind is the most valuable asset an organization can have. This vision extends into our very healthcare system. The arbitrary line between the mind and the body is erased. A routine physical exam includes a mental health screening as standard practice. Your doctor asks about your stress levels, your sleep quality, and your mood with the same gravity they ask about your blood pressure. Therapy is not a last resort for the broken, but a form of routine maintenance for the healthy, like going to the dentist or getting an oil change. It's affordable, it's accessible through telehealth or local clinics, and the stigma is gone. It's simply seen as a tool for living a better, more resilient life. And perhaps most importantly, this vision lives in our communities. It's in the language we use, where words like crazy or psycho are finally retired to the history books, understood to be as harmful and ignorant as any other slur. It's in our neighborhoods, where checking in on a neighbor who's been quiet lately is second nature. It's in our emergency services, where police and paramedics are extensively trained in crisis de-escalation, recognizing that a mental health crisis requires a compassionate response, not a confrontational one. It's a society where vulnerability is the new currency of connection, and where we understand that true community strength is measured by how we care for our most vulnerable members. This is the America we are building. It's not a country free of problems, free of sadness, or free of struggle. That's not the goal. The goal is a country where no one has to face those struggles alone, where the systems are in place to catch us when we fall, and the culture is in place to lift us back up. So how do we get there? We've seen the history, we've understood the problem, we've envisioned the future. But what is the bridge from here to there? The answer is both frustratingly complex and beautifully simple. The bridge is you. It's me. It's us. The grand systemic change we need is built brick by brick through individual action. It starts with a commitment, a personal decision to no longer be a passive bystander in the story of mental health in America. Starts with self-education. It means taking the awareness from this month and turning it into a year-round curiosity. It means reading the books, listening to the podcasts, following the therapists and advocates who share their wisdom online. It means learning the difference between mental health and mental illness, understanding the signs of common conditions, and learning the language of support. Then it's about turning that knowledge outward. It's about having the courage to be the one who breaks the silence. It's checking in on that friend who's gone quiet on social media, not with a generic "hope you're okay," but with a specific, "Hey, I've noticed you've been distant lately. I'm thinking of you and I'm here to listen if you want to talk." No pressure. It's about learning to listen, truly listen, without an immediate need to fix the problem. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is to simply sit in the darkness with them and let them know they're not alone. And for those who feel able, it's about sharing your own story. Every single time someone shares their experience with anxiety, depression, trauma, or therapy, they chip away at the mountain of stigma. You don't have to broadcast it to the world. It can be a quiet conversation with one trusted person. But your story gives someone else permission to own theirs. It normalizes the universal human experience of struggling. It turns a statistic into a soul, a diagnosis into a person. Your vulnerability can be a lifeline for someone else. Beyond our personal circles, the bridge is built through advocacy. It's understanding that mental health is a political issue. It's about demanding that our elected officials treat this crisis with the urgency it deserves. It means voting for policies that expand access to care, that mandate mental health education in schools, that enforce parity so insurance companies have to cover mental health care equally to physical health care. It means supporting and donating to the organizations on the front lines, the NAMI chapters, the crisis text lines, the Trevor projects, the grassroots groups doing the hard work in our communities every single day. But the absolute non-negotiable first step in building this bridge? It's turning all of this compassion inward. It's practicing radical self-compassion. You cannot pour from an empty cup. You cannot be a beacon of support for others if your own light is flickering. It means giving yourself the same grace you would give a friend. It means recognizing that your productivity does not define your worth. It means setting boundaries, saying no, and resting without guilt. It means acknowledging your own pain, your own stress, your own need for help, and then taking the brave step to get that help. Modeling good mental hygiene is one of the most powerful forms of advocacy there is. This is why Mental Health Awareness Month matters. May isn't the finish line. It's the starting pistol that fires every single year, reminding us that the race is still on. It's a dedicated time to recharge our collective batteries, to refocus our efforts, to welcome new people into the conversation, and to measure our progress. It's a national check-in, a time to ask, are we doing better than last year? Are we talking more openly? Are we listening more deeply? Are our systems becoming more compassionate? The work doesn't end on May 31st. That's when it truly begins. The awareness we cultivate this month must fuel the actions we take for the next 11. So, as this month comes to a close, the question isn't just what you've learned. The question is, what will you do now? Will you be the one to check in on a friend? Will you be the one to share your story? Will you be the one to contact your representative? Will you be the one to finally book that therapy appointment you've been putting off? Because the vision of a mentally healthy America isn't going to be built for us. It must be built by us. It is the sum total of millions of small acts of courage, compassion, and connection. It is the ultimate grassroots project. And it is the most important structure we will ever build. Because a nation's greatness is not ultimately measured by its military might or its economic output. It is measured by the well-being of its people, by our capacity to care for one another and for ourselves. That is the true state of the Union, and we together have the power to make it a healthy one.